So, welcome back to Module 3. This module, we're looking at how to tie the knots. Knots Part 1 is where we're at today. We're going to be looking at the stopper knot, the bowline, round turn 2/2 hitches, and a clove hitch. We'll get to practice this again in Knots Part 2, but it's a good idea to find a piece of rope and practice these knots whenever you can. You can re-look at this module whenever you like. And just use the bits of the video that just for the knot that you're working on. We will have some close-ups of me tying knots and talking you through it. So it's really important just to practice the knots, and it's just repetition. On your first day of the level 1 course, when we go out sailing, we'll actually give you a piece of rope, and maybe then you can revisit this module. If you've got a piece of rope that you can find at home, it's a good idea to make a start. Trying to learn these knots. And when there are two ends, so we've got a working end and a bitter end. I won't be using that terminology that much, but if you want to get really technical, there's lots of words like a bite is a loop in a rope. So I'm not going to be using really technical terms like that. I'm just going to try and keep the language really simple so that you can follow and tie these knots. So the first knot we're going to have a look at is the figure of 8 stopper knot. Now we put this knot in the end of the ropes, and that just stops them from pulling through the pulleys. So when we've rigged our boat up and we've got the boat all ready to go sailing, we don't want the ropes to unthread through all the pulleys that we put them through, because then we're going to have to rig the boat up again when we're out on the water. So we put a knot in the end, and one of the knots that we can use is a figure of 8 stopper knot. So let's have a look at our figure of 8 stopper knot. If I fold the rope over, we can make an alien head shape. And then if I strangle the alien a little bit and poke him in the eye, it will make an 8 shape. And when I pull that tight, there's our figure of 8 stopper knot. Let's show you that again. So we're making an alien shape, head. We're going to strangle the alien just a little bit, poke him in the eye. There's our 8 shape. So we can pull that tight, and there's our figure of 8. It's a really useful knot to stop our ropes getting pulled through the pulleys. And I like to have a tail so that I can pull it back. One thing to note is that it's quite wide there, but on the side it's quite slim. And when it gets tension on it, it can get smaller. So initially that might not go through the pulley, but particularly if we've got a bigger pulley and a knot that got a lot of tension on it, sometimes that can just wiggle through. And that's where the double overhand stopper knot comes in. To get this undone, we need to wiggle it, and if we wiggle it, it will slowly loosen up until we can undo it. So there we go. One more time. We make our alien shape, we strangle our alien, we poke our alien in the eye, and then we pull it tight. That's our figure of 8 stopper knot. So another stopper knot is called the double overhand stopper knot. Same use as the figure of 8 knot previously. So double overhand stopper knot is even easier than the figure of 8 to tie. If we cross the rope over, almost like we're doing up our shoes, and then we go round one more time, when we pull that tight, we end up with 2 little loops going across the main rope going through. And as you can see, at all angles, that's a little bit more chunky than the figure of 8 knot. So this is the double overhand stopper knot. It's really easy to undo, even with it being pulled really tight. To undo it, all we do is separate those 2 bits that are going across, pull them apart, and there we have slack in the knot, and we can undo it. So let's show you that again. So I'm going to cross the rope over like I'm doing up my shoes. I'm going to go round one more time, and then I'm going to pull that tight, and there we have the double overhand stopper knot. Its use is exactly the same as the figure of 8. It's going to stop that rope from being pulled through a pulley, and if we have a tail we can pull it back. It's just a bit chunkier, so if you've got a thin rope going through a bigger pulley, the more chunky knot was more likely to not pull through. So that's my preference, the double overhand stopper knot. Okay, now we're moving on to the bowline, or bowline, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's often referred to as the king of knots, and we can use it for a lot of different applications when we're sailing. Mainly we'll use it to tie ropes to sails. So the rope we tie to the top of the sail, the halyard, is just a rope that pulls the sail up the mast. It comes from square rigged boats where they had square sails, and they had a boom and a yard arm at the top of the sail. And if we were hauling the yard arm up the mast, we were pulling on the halyard. So to haul the yard arm up the mast became halyard, and that's where that name comes from. So halyard, not rocket science, just a rope that pulls a sail up a mast, and a main halyard would pull the main sail up the mast, and we would tie the halyard onto the top of the sail with a bowline. And we could also use it for docking a boat. You know, we could tie a loop in the rope and throw it over the top of a pole. We could use it in a man overboard recovery where we tie a big loop. One of the key points of a bowline is that that loop won't change size. So if we tie a bowline that's big enough to go over someone's shoulders, it won't get smaller as we pull them back on board. It won't kind of cut the circulation off. Probably not going to be very comfortable, but we'll be able to retrieve them with a bowline. Also the sheets. So sheets are ropes that control where the sail is. So halyard pulls the sail up. Sheets control where the sails are. And if we're attaching a rope to a sail, we're probably going to do that with a bowline. We could also use it as a stopper knot if we want. That nice loop would make a nice handle, which would be quite comfortable. Really important knot to use, and it's a little bit tricky to get into. I'll go through it as slowly as I can. So let's have a look at how we tie that. Okay, so the bowline, the king of knots. For that, it's easier to tie if we tie it around something. So I'm going to use the ballet bar here, and here we go. We're just going to loop it round. Now I've got a short bit and a longer one. On the short one, I'm going to put my finger out, and I'm going to bend the long one around my finger. That's going to form a loop where the rope crosses underneath, and this is part of the knot. So this short end I'm going to call a rabbit from now on. So the rabbit lives underground, and it comes up out of his hole. He runs round the back of the tree, and then he goes back down the hole. And then you end up with a knot that looks a little bit like a life jacket, how it goes round. And the important thing is that this loop won't change size. That loop will stay the same size. As you pull the rope tighter, it won't change. It's not a slip knot. To get it undone, if we roll it over, we push this bit down, we can get some slack in it and it will undo. So let's go through that one more time, a bit slower. We're going to wrap it around something. We're going to put our finger out, we're going to wrap them around our finger. Now if your bowline doesn't work, it might be that when this loop is facing the short rope, instead of this long rope crossing underneath, it crosses on top. So it won't work if that's the case. When we wrap it around our finger, it needs to be underneath. Then when our rabbit comes up out of the hole and runs behind the tree, it can go back down the hole. Now that's another important thing. That's another thing that sometimes people get wrong. If it comes back up the hole again, that's not going to work because it's not kind of locking that bit. So we need to go around, and then we're on top and we're going to go back down. And then we can pull that tight. And there we have our bowline. Creates a nice loop. In particular, this is a bowline because the tail is on the inside of that loop. If I go round the tree the wrong way, I'll end up with the tail on the outside of the loop. Technically this isn't a bowline. I can't really see why this would be not as strong as the actual bowline, but if you're sailing with someone who's very particular about knots, this will be wrong. I'm not too concerned generally, but if we want to do it correctly, the tail will be on the inside of the loop. I guess it makes it a bit neater, keeps the tail out of the way perhaps. It's the same knot though, still going around this. The friction within the knot I think would be the same. So either way I think it's going to be the same strength. Technically though, this is a bowline, and going around the tree in the wrong direction means that knot, while it looks like a bowline, is technically not. It'll probably work though, so don't feel too stressed about it. If you tie a knot, tie the bowline, and the skipper of the boat says, hey, there's something wrong with your bowline, you'll know what to do. You don't need to untie all of it, just untie it a bit, go around the tree the other way, and your rabbit goes back down the hole. There's your bowline. So you can be corrected. The two issues that we get when tying the bowline is that this crosses underneath, that's correct. If it crosses over the top, that's not correct. Sometimes when the loop is facing away from this bit, it crosses underneath, so it can look a bit different. So we want to have the loop pointing towards the rabbit, and it needs to cross underneath. If your loop crosses underneath, then that's good and it should work. The only other thing we need to remember is that the rabbit comes up out of the hole, lives underground, comes up to the surface, runs behind the tree, and then goes back down the hole to safety. I'm going to put it tight. There we have our bowline. Okay, now we're moving on to a round turn and 2 half hitches. And this knot can be used for a lot of different purposes. Docking is a really good use for it because it's one of the only knots, certainly the only knot I know of, that we can undo while the rope has tension on it. Pretty simple name, round turn. We need to go round twice. That takes the load of the knot or whatever is pulling on the rope. The 2 half hitches, so we do one half hitch, and then another half hitch, and that will stop the knot from coming undone. Let's take a look at that. This knot is just as the name suggests, it's a round turn followed by 2 half hitches. So if I wrap the rope around the bar, this is not considered a round turn. There's not enough friction, so we need to go round again. So the round turn is like 2 wraps around, if you like. Now we need to do our half hitches. If I cross the rope over, you see there's a wee gap here. So if I just poke the tail through that gap and pull that up tight, that's 1 half hitch. So I just need to do that again. There's the gap, take the tail, poke it through, it's all in the same direction, and pull that tight. So here we have a round turn, 1 half hitch, another half hitch, and that's how you tie the knot.
Now the really good thing about this knot is if I pull on this line, imagine I've tied my boat to the dock and the wind is blowing on it, so there's load on the line, I can still undo it. And this is the only knot that I know that we can undo when there's load on the line. And it's all because of that round turn. If we go round once, it slides really easily. If we go round twice, when there's tension, there's a lot of friction on there and it doesn't slip. It's the round turn that takes the load. The half hitches, so there's one half hitch, and then let's tie the next half hitch. They just back up on themselves and stop it from coming undone, but it's actually the round turn that does all the work. So there we go, the round turn and 2 half hitches. It's a really useful knot.
And the last knot that we're going to cover today is the clove hitch. Clove hitch is a really useful knot, and I think I've said that for every knot so far, but I quite like using it for fenders. It is a knot that could come undone if the fenders are left for a long time. It's a really nice knot to use when you're just throwing the fenders on quickly as you're coming into the dock. So let's have a look at that.
Okay, so the clove hitch, it's another useful knot. Starts off a little bit like the round turn, but instead of wrapping it around, as we go round for our second around, we're going to go across. So the round turn just comes kind of parallel. The clove hitch goes across, and as the tail comes round, we literally just poke that underneath the bit that crosses, and when we pull that tight, the bit that goes across keeps it done up. It's a very simple knot, it's really quick and easy to tie. Let's start again with that one. So you wrap it around, so once around, across, and for the second wrap around, we tuck the tail underneath the bit that crosses, and when we pull it tight, the pressure of that crossing piece keeps it done up. Now, if I was using that to put my fenders on the lifelines or something, I can move it to reposition the fenders where they need to be, and I can quickly take up some length if I want to. I don't have to retie it, so I can move the height of the fender. Now, as that goes around, it will kind of shake loose. So if I leave the boat for a month, I'll probably come back and find all my fenders have fallen off. So it's quite nice, perhaps if you're going to leave the boat for a while, just to throw in a couple of half hitches. That will keep that done up for a while. Or you can just tie a loop. So if I pass a loop, or if you want to be really technical, a bight through there, I can pull that tight. That will keep the clove hitch done up. And when I come back and I want to take off my fenders, I can just pull on the tail and it will come undone and it will come off really easily. So let's tie that just one more time. We're going around, we're going across, we're going around again. We're going to poke the tail underneath, and there we have our clove hitch.
Okay, so well done. That's knots part 1. There is no quiz for this module, so practice the knots. Keep reviewing this video if you need to, but main thing, just that repetition. The more times you do it, the more it will sink in. And move on to module 4 when you're ready. And I'll see you there.